So tonight we lit the seventh candle of Chanukah, meaning tomorrow night we will have a complete illuminated menorah, giving off the maximum amount of light. And we know that that's the purpose of Hanukkah. We're celebrating light. The menorah was always lit and was part of the original Mishkan and was incorporated into the first temple and the second temple. And light was the illumination of Torah, the clarity, the insight, as we described briefly last week, the specific perspective of understanding that we can arrive at through understanding Torah and through cherishing our Torah and making that by taking it as our illumination point and adopting that perspective on life. A comment. The essence of the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles is called Ner Ish Ubeito. One candle, one person, one man within the household. And in a very interesting discussion, Rav Asher Weiss describes and explains that according to Maimonides, the essence is to gather a family unit together. And a family unit, we always know, is the ultimate nuclear point of Jewish life. A husband and a wife and children, parents and a child, a parent and children, whatever the situation is, there's a family unit, a nuclear family unit, and that becomes the building block of all of Jewish life. And hence, as Rav Asher Weiss explains, it's a mitzvah that devolves on the unit itself. So it really can be fulfilled by any member of that unit going out in front of his house, which was the original tradition, and by the doorway kindling a light to broadcast the understanding that today is a night of Hanukkah, and we were the recipient of amazing miracles and sustenance for God overcoming amazing odds, withstanding the onslaught of Greek culture and all the challenges it represented, spiritual challenges that it represented. And here we are today standing, remaining in full appreciation and awestruck and thankful and filled with words of praise of God for sustaining us through all this travail. And that's what we build night after night. Our night gets brighter and brighter and brighter. Tomorrow night's known as Zot Chanukah. This is the completion of Hanukkah, where we have a menorah that's giving off the maximum light and proclaiming as loudly, as publicly as we possibly can, that we as a family unit, as a household, as householders, however we want to describe it, whatever the situation may be, each and every house is proclaiming that participation. And this sense of it being a responsibility, he describes halachically, and many of us have a custom that many Chanukiahs are lit, and that's great and wonderful. It doesn't contradict anything we're saying, but the essence of fulfilling the commandment is for a household to draw together and to share that responsibility to give that out. And that provokes a certain thought, which I think is so illuminated in this week's Torah reading in Vayigash, that I want to discuss it and I want to tie it in with the essence and the clear message that Hanukkah is meant to give us. This week's Torah reading, Vayigash, which begins in chapter 34, right in the middle of the chapter, sentence 18, it's the resolution of what we've been reading about for the last three parshiot, and it's not completely resolved until really the book of Genesis ends, Bereshit ends, which will be in the parsha after this one. But it's a moment in time where Joseph is standing firm as the unknown viceroy of Egypt and insisting that Benjamin, in whose sack the royal cup was found, needs to be retained, and Yehuda fulfilling his pledge to his father that he would not return without his brother Benjamin, standing before this viceroy and ultimately saying, take me as your slave, take me in his place, and let him return to his father. It's a very heartfelt, emotional appeal. It has overtones of strength also, Rashi points out, but basically it's described by Chazal as reaching into the depths of the heart of this unknown ruler who in fact was Yosef. And the Midrash paints two pictures. One, that this appeal on the part of Yehuda was so sincere, it was so overpowering, that not only was he appealing to Yosef, but all the attendants to the viceroy, all the Egyptians who were there, basically had joined in with him and said, please accept his offer. Let him remain behind. Let this boy go back to his father with the rest of the brothers so that the father can survive and not be crushed by such a terrible loss. And at that moment, Yosef breaks down, dismisses everyone, and reveals to his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef. I am the then 17-year-old boy whom you sold out to slavery and separated me from the family. Another description of the interplay that's going on here. And it has to be looked at from two perspectives. The Medrash quotes a sentence in Mishlei. It happens to be Proverbs 18:4. But it describes the following. It says, people come upon a deep, deep well, and they look down and they see there's very clear, beautiful, sustaining waters in that well, but it's unreachable. It's just too deep of a well. And then one wise person comes along and takes the bucket, which has a limited string, but he ties another rope to that rope, and another rope, and another rope, and another rope, and he keeps advancing the bucket slowly but surely down to the ultimate depth so that it can encounter those pure essential waters. And interestingly and surprisingly, the way the Zohar is understood is that it was Joseph using his wisdom to access the deep, deep waters within his brother Yehuda so that he would reach this point of complete conviction that he was required and responsible to give his own life up and to be enslaved to this viceroy so that his brother and all of the remaining brothers could return to their father and live on, which of course is a flip. It's a complete opposite of the moment in which the brothers colluded and decided to sell Yosef into slavery for whatever reasons, feeling he was a threat to them, feeling as though the unity or the future of the Jewish people required them to remove this one brother out of the 12 and to therefore just go on with what was left. So we reached, according to this understanding, we reached this magnificent moment of resolution by Yosef, the viceroy, in fulfillment of his dreams that he had way back when and shared with his brothers, but carefully, step by step, accessing the most inner, pure, holy source of understanding and wisdom within Yehuda that brought together this sense of resolution, that brought Yehuda to this point where Yehuda, the future king of the Jewish people, the future ultimate leader of the Jewish people, because Yosef's leadership is always fleeting, but it's to Yehuda that comes the lasting rulership and dominion as the king through King David and his line after him. Him to reach the point of his readiness wholeheartedly to accept that deep, deep connection that connects one brother to another and makes a family into a family and makes him willing to say, take me as a slave forever, the words he uses in sentence 33 here. Yoshav no abducha tachat anar. I will stand in place of this youth. Eved Ladoni, and I, who has been foretold and destined to rulership, I will remain your servant. The Hanar Yao El Imechav, and that this youth, this Benjamin, same word youth as referred to Yosef in the beginning of the story, let him and his brothers return back to their father. What it conveys is a sense of understanding that for Yehuda to qualify as a future king of the Jewish people, to become the source of an eternal rulership, Yehuda had to reach within the depths of his soul and had to be accessed to the point where his complete understanding was that dominion is not for my gain and my purpose and to protect my future interests, but rather it's to protect the integrity and the connection and the wholeness of the Jewish people. And that's what Yosef was orchestrating here. That's the view that Yosef had, according to this understanding, going way back to those original dreams. Yes, all these sheaves were going to surround me and they were going to bow down to me. But their bowing down to me wasn't because ultimately I was to rule. Their bowing down was me to show that ultimately each and every one of them, and of course myself ultimately included through my own experience of being sold into slavery, we would all recognize our readiness to completely give ourselves up for the good of the whole of the group, and to recognize the fact that the Jewish people only survive and only continue strong when each and every one sees themselves as Orev, as a guarantor, as responsible, as connected to each and every one of the other brothers. And this was really mirrored in a similar medrash in last week's Torah reading in Miketz at the end, where it says, and this is again in chapter 44, but if you turn back to Miketz, when they find out that the cup was in the sack of Benjamin, Vayikru Simlosam, all the brothers tore their clothes. Now, spontaneously and at one, they all felt this is an ultimate tragedy that we're going to be returned back to Egypt, but we're not going to go back as individuals to see who's going to be held accountable. We're going to go back as brothers, sharing the responsibility, feeling total accountability for one another. And in the beautiful Medrash, the Medrash says, the fact that all the brothers tore their clothing on behalf of Benjamin, that's what created the purity which enabled Mordechai, a descendant of Benjamin, to tear his clothing into sackcloth when at the time of the Purim miracle, it was announced that the Jewish people were threatened to be destroyed. He tore his clothing on behalf of all of his brothers, and he got that strength and that inspiration and the idea and the connection came to him based on this event that's happening here. So when we think about resolution here, it's not a game. It's not an idea of Yosef playing out his dreams to torment his brothers, but rather through these midrashim, what we see here is that each of these events as they unfold is meant for each and every one of these brothers to dig deep within themselves and to recognize the culpability they had in the selling out of Yosef to begin with, and to come to a conclusion of the depth of connection and interpersonal responsibility that they're always to have for one another. And I think this is contained within the idea of Ner Ish Ubeto. Okay, I get up in the morning and I put on my tefillin. Everyone gets up and does mitzvahs, they daven, they pray, they wash their hands, they make blessings. We're doing that as individuals. But there are mitzvot that revolve around us, and Chanukah is one of them, for us to act in lighting and proclaiming this salvation, not as an individual, not as a sense that, well, there were individual heroes and Yehuda and this one and that one. No, it's a sense that the depth of conviction that caused the Hashmonaim to rise up was one that each and every Jewish person needed to be protected from the onslaught of Hellenistic culture and the loss of Jewish identity. And they only acted on behalf of everyone. So when we light our candles each and every one of these nights, when we lit our 7 candles tonight, and when we're going to light all 8 candles tomorrow night, we do so as a nuclear unit of a magnificent whole, of a magnificent people. lest anyone feel that this impinges on my individual importance, I want to call your attention to a related thought that Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch connects also to the concept of Hanukkah, that we're not celebrating our might and our power, but rather we're celebrating the spirit of Jewish living, which comes to a very big extent to be based upon Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh. We're all tied up with one another. When you look in Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 7, you find something, God proclaims something. God says, I'm always going to be with the Jewish people no matter what. It's not a love that's dependent on anything. It's a love that's complete devotion on God's part to us. And then God reflects and says, Lo mirubchem mikol ha'amim choshak Hashem bochem, ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim. And God says, don't think that I'm looking for a massive nation of millions of people, because then the Torah predicts and prophesies that we're never going to be a mass of people. Just as an aside, Beryl Wine did some demographic calculations and claims at the time of the destruction of the first temple, there were probably as many Jews in the world as there were Chinese people. I don't know what it's based on, but that's what he claims to have seen. And if you think about that, there should be billions of us, but there aren't, because the Torah predicts God doesn't want many. It's not a strength in numbers, but it's specifically because we're few. And I think there's a message here also. We're few so that we should never forget that each and every one of us matters. First of all, we should never feel as though, what is the big difference to the Jewish people? To what extent I affiliate, to what extent I pray on behalf of the Jewish people, to what extent I'm willing to step forward and proudly identify as a Jewish person. We're small, we're few. It also means we can't afford to marginalize anyone else. We can't act like those 10 brothers once acted and think to ourselves, well, there's 10 of us, there's one of him. If we can push him out of the picture, then our future and ultimately the future of the Jewish people will be brighter. We're not allowed to think that way. And one of the mechanisms that God assures that we do not come to think that way is by keeping us small in number. Everyone counts. Everyone matters. Every Chanukah that's lit for each family of the Jewish people casts its own individual light. And it's not in the billions. It's barely in the millions. But every one of those lights illuminate the world. And it enables us to influence the world. Why? Because if we sought to influence the world through strength of numbers, we would automatically be losing the message of Judaism, which is, it's not numbers, it's not power, it's not might, it's not wisdom, all the things we alluded to last week's class that the prophet Jeremiah says, that don't take pride in your wisdom, don't take pride in your wealth, don't take pride in your physical strength. Take pride in the extent to which you understand God, to which you're close to God. And one of our understandings to God that the Torah reveals in Devarim chapter 7, verse 7 is that God says there's just going to be a few of you, and each of you are going to matter. And because of that, each of you have to matter to one another. No one's easily expendable. No one can feel they're lost in a crowd. No one can feel as though, well, as long as other people are taking care of Israel, I don't have to be at the forefront. All of that gets wiped out because of the frail, small, weak existence relative to the power brokers of the world that we are always destined to have. Because if we didn't have that vantage point, we would perforce lose the real message of what Torah is all about. And what I would point to is that if you look in Maimonides, when he talks about the laws of Hanukkah, he has 2 chapters. He has a section which has 4 chapters in total. 2 of them are about Purim. The next 2 are about Hanukkah. He ends his section on Chanukah saying, making an audacious statement, quoting a sentence that we're familiar with, Drocheha darchei noam, v'chol nesivoseh shalom. The ways of God are pleasant. All the pathways lead to peace. Usually that sentence is cited when the rabbis are debating a law and the strictness of the law could cause strife amongst people, and they invoke that to say, let's not take that application of the law because it'll create disunity. It'll create tension amongst people. Let's rather err on the side of unity. Usually that's how it's quoted. Maimonides, at the conclusion of the laws of Hanukkah, does not use it that way, but he surprisingly says the purpose of Torah, lo nitna Torah, except to achieve peace. What does he mean by that? What he means by that in the context of what we've talked about here is that the peace is that we're vulnerable, we're small, we have a tremendously important message to give off the world. We have a quality of light to introduce into the world, just like we do each of the nights of Hanukkah and lighting the menorah, which is irreplaceable. No one else can provide it but us. But so therefore, we have to ensure the peacefulness amongst ourselves so that the message of Torah, so that the light of Torah can shine, so that we can truly represent God's perspective in the world. And ultimately, that's going to be how we emerge victorious. I would tell you an analogy, I'll just tell you very quickly. Similarly, Hirsch says that the reason Moshe was chosen, one of the reasons he was chosen to lead the Jewish people, were the very objections he makes at the burning bush, because he is kavad peh. He had difficulty, he had a speech impediment. And basically what Hirsch writes there is, of course I want a leader who has a speech impediment, because I don't want anyone ever thinking that Pharaoh succumbed to the great rhetoric and the beautiful words of a Moshe Rabbeinu. I wanted him to be listening to God's message through the mouth of a person who had difficulty even forming the words, so that the words themselves should matter and not the style and not the surrounding things, but the essence of what Moshe was meant to convey to the world. That's our Hanukkah candles. In the end, it's 8 small flames. But as long as our nuclear families, as long as it's Ner Ishu Beto, we see each household stepping forward to light its menorah. And cumulatively, we recognize the fact that we need all this light. We need all this light. We need more even, but with all of this light, by recognizing the value of the neighbor's light just as much as our own, then we fulfill the destiny of the Jewish people. And then, remarkably, we persevere. Lo b'chayil, lo b'koach. Even a recent Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, coined a phrase. He said, Lo b'zchut hakoach. We're not winning the land of Israel through the merit of our strength, ella b'koach haschut, but rather it's the strength of the merit that we bring to the conflict that's going to enable us to prevail and enable us to rebuild the land of Israel. These are the visions that are deep, deep within each of us. And we have to master the art of capturing light that's out there. And we have to master the art of tying one rope to another, so that we can plumb the depths of our most pure, authentic, humble selves, so that we're ready to do whatever it takes, so that we can add our light to the world, so that we can act with a total conviction that ultimately these small flames will light up everything and make it clear to everyone. We just have to do our part with purity and with selflessness and in recognition of the importance of one another, and then we reach this goal. Everyone should enjoy a very, very wonderful, happy Hanukkah.